Awesome. All right, well, I will kick us off. Thank you everyone for coming today to the AIA Urban Design panel. So my name is Fiona Lyon. I am an urban design panel executive committee representative. We have a couple others here today that have identified themselves by that. And today our presentation is on BRT station design, accessibility, and inclusive design. We have three presenters. Jesse Stemler, design manager with TriMet, Derek Abe, senior planning associate with Alta Planning Design, and Scott Clark, an associate architect with Pivot Architectures. Thank you to those three for joining and sharing this wonderful walkthrough of the Division BRT FX line. So just a little bit about the urban design panel before we jump in. We are sponsored jointly by the American Institute of Architects, the American Planning Association, and the American Society of Landscape Architects. And it's comprised of professionals from all three of those organizations with a shared interest in urban design. The AIA has previously hosted the event at the Center for Architecture in Portland, and now generously offers this monthly Zoom meeting until further notice. In addition to our monthly email announcement, our panel presentations can be found on the AIA Oregon event calendar, as well as their weekly Thursdays in 3 newsletter. And participation in this event makes you a panel member. We encourage you to sign up for information about these future presentations. When you register for any UDP presentations, you will be included in upcoming invitations, so keep that in mind. And we also encouraged you to send any future topics for these presentations to us. Heather Wilson's email at AIA Oregon is in the chat if you don't mind sending future presentation ideas our way. And a note that these presentations are recorded and they will be made available by AIA as a Vimeo, and that can be found. We will also share the link for that in the chat. Thank you, Kathy. This presentation will be about 40 minutes long, and it will be followed by a Q&A. For the Q&A, please pose your questions and comments in the chat box, and we will sort of share and monitor those. Our executive committee members will be managing that chat function for the meeting, and any follow-up questions about the content today can be sent to the presenters if we have their permission to share contact. And just one last thing as a courtesy, please remember to mute yourselves during the presentation so that we can focus on the content. So with that, thank you everyone again for joining, and I'm going to hand it over to Jesse Stemler with TriMet. Jesse, please take it away.
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you so much. Well, we are super excited to be here to present on Division Transit Project, now called FX, that we just recently opened this weekend, fresh off of sweeping away the confetti, and now going right into service with this new bus rapid transit project, which is the first for the Portland region, and unlike anything that TriMet has quite undertaken before. And so we'll go in and talk a little bit about what this project looks like, but we're going to spend a lot of it going back and talking about the design of this project, being that it was something that unlike anything we had done before, it really took a different approach. And we're going to dive in and just with the help of Pivot Architecture and Alta Planning and Design, talk about their process and the rigor that went into really understanding and designing the station environments in particular. But before we do that, I wanted to provide a little context and talk about why BRT was something that was needed for the Division corridor. If you know anything about Line 2, our bus line on Division, it is a workhorse. It has ridership right below our MAX lines. And it is really a vital corridor that connects those communities of East Portland and Gresham to downtown Portland. It is a corridor that is culturally rich and the most diverse in the state. And having those connections from East Portland to Portland is really critical. And we've heard that and understood that for a very long time. So a little bit now about BRT. So I really think about bus rapid transit as light rail on rubber. We have longer buses, so there are these longer articulated buses, 60 feet in length, that have much higher capacity than our standard 40-foot buses. And we use a number of tools to move those buses through corridors much quicker than standard bus service. That includes transit signal priority, and I won't go into the details on that, but basically what it is it's a technology that allows our buses to talk to the signals. So we can either keep those green lights longer, or we can quickly change those red lights. So it is a technology that we rely on heavily to move those buses through the corridor. And a big part of this project was putting in that new technology along the corridor at every single signal to get those buses moving faster. In addition, we consolidate bus stops, so we have fewer bus stops, but we have those bus stops where they're really needed. We try to achieve near level boarding, so we have higher platforms that allow people to get on and off our buses much easier. We stop in lane, keeping us moving and not having to weave in and out of traffic, and a number of other tools. So wanted to talk a little bit about the challenges that we faced. Division, if you've been along Division, you know that Division and 11th and Division and Eastwood and Gresham are entirely two different places. In interdivision, in the west segment, what we call the west segment, is 2 lanes of traffic and a turn pocket, where the street character is such that you really have a 4-6 foot sidewalk with buildings really at the back side of that sidewalk edge. And then we transition to the central segment, where you quickly start to see a 4-lane cross section with a center turning lane, bike lanes. And then in the east segment, as we get closer to Gresham, still 4 lanes with that turn pocket, but you get more into a suburban type environment. So when we were looking at trying to design stations, we really needed to accommodate all of these conditions, and in a corridor that has a lot of aging infrastructure. So we were challenged with a number of things going into the project. So I talked a little bit about the segments. This is how we broke up our project and how we thought about it, both from a planning and design point of view, but also how we ended up tackling it in construction. So the west segment from 11th to 87th, central segment 87th to 148th, and then the east segment in Gresham. The corridor and service connects downtown Portland, the transit mall, to Gresham, as I previously mentioned. We have 42 stations or 83 platforms that are spaced every approximately 1/3 of a mile. And we get those improved travel times by those tools that I previously described. Also wanted to mention that this project that we undertook starting in, well, the construction starting 3 years ago, also included in tandem the outer division multimodal safety project that we did with our partners at the city. And so as part of that project, they implemented a number of safety improvements along the corridor. While our project was going on, they were implementing these safety measures. This is a high crash corridor, so safety is really critical here. And we saw a lot of accidents, a lot of fatalities along this corridor. So safety was a #1 priority. And as part of their project, putting in signalized pedestrian crossings, protected bike lanes, more crosswalks, increased lighting were all part of the project that they were undertaking, and we took on aspects of that scope as well. I also wanted to point out that as part of this project, we implemented a protected bicycle lane. So this is a buffered bicycle lane with a hardened curb between the adjacent travel lane and the bike lane. And I mention that because it's going to come up as one of those elements that were really challenging, but we needed to tackle was integrating multimodal stations. And you'll see a little bit more of that when I hand it over to Alta. This was an FTA federally funded small starts project. And as part of that project, there are things that we had to do and we wanted to do. Every station needed to integrate shelter, weather protection, lighting, bus marker with real-time information. I mentioned the bicycle infrastructure, amenities at those station platforms, seating, trash receptacles, bike racks, etc. And we needed to really have a way to have consistent branding so that this really read as one continuous system that people easily recognized and could use. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Scott at Pivot Architecture, and he's going to talk a bit about the station design process and what Pivot had done from the beginning of our project up and through what was ultimately implemented. So with that, Scott, I'll turn it to you and just let me know when you'd like me to advance the slides.
Thank you, Jesse. So where I'd kind of like to start, you can go to the next slide, is just talking about the basic precepts of the project. It was clear when we started this, and we started this, Pivot started working on this project with Jesse and his team over 5 years ago, five and a quarter years ago. So it's been a long haul and a great adventure that we've gone through in the process of this project. And I've got to say that Saturday at the grand opening ceremony, it was just very rewarding to be there and to see our work realized in a way that I'm very proud of. So, but going back to the beginning, one of the fundamental precepts of the project from TriMet's perspective, which we share in all the projects we do, was that this system should be something that does not subtract from, but adds to the environment it serves. So these projects are often perceived, particularly by the public and often by business owners of adjacent properties, as oppositional, that they are some inconvenience or maybe even a terminal negative factor in the operation of their businesses. And TriMet's insistence from day one was that these should be symbiotic relationships, not oppositional. And so if that's the place where you start, there's a certain amount of rigor involved in actually making that happen. And I think we got there. It was no small amount of work. This slide shows a bit of the analysis we did. It's block by block analysis of a very long alignment, 15 miles of this. And through, as Jesse mentioned, very diverse kinds of environments. That inner segment he mentioned, interdivision, we have extremely urban environment, very tight right of way, 60 feet. Extremely successful businesses, a lot happening, a lot of utilities, a lot of infrastructure of various kinds, a lot of modes of transportation. Very, very difficult to weave through. And then in the middle segment, we have a very different environment, much broader, much more automobile dominated, all of that. And then when we get out towards Gresham, we go through segments that are actually feel a little bit rural. So it's a very very difficult thing to try to handle with one system. So we were initially searching for this typical solution that would solve all of our problems, and eventually we got to a point where it was very evident that there is no typical, that they are it's just too diverse for that. And in fact, we got to a place where we realized that each platform needed to be designed as an independent thing. Yes, they have commonalities. Yes, they need commonalities, that they have to be usable. People have to know how to use them, recognize where they are and how and what the names are and where they're placed, all that kind of thing. But there need to be lots of flexibility to accommodate all of the various conditions that we were facing. And I guess one other comment about these three segments is that we had to understand what the strategy was for each of them, because you can make some generalizations. And so for that west segment Jesse mentioned, I think one of our realizations was that the first thing was to sort of, do no harm. That we should not be making things worse, and it would be easy to make things worse in that part of Portland, because it's a very highly functioning urban environment. And then in outer division, the needs are different. We need to provide pedestrian refuge, and the ODMMSP that Jesse mentioned, and the project was very much a part of that. But the transit system as well needed to provide a sense, a real and perceived sense of refuge and safety. And then in Gresham, it's a refuge from darkness and isolation sometimes, that it needed to feel like an oasis. For all segments, we needed a sense of continuity. Jesse already mentioned this, but a sense that it is one thing, and it's a diverse set of environments, but it's all connected, and that there is an organism that starts in downtown Gresham and ends in downtown Portland, and that becomes one unified thing. It's still heterogeneous, still lots of variety, but it is one entity, one imageable, in Kevin Lynch's terms, imageable entity. So the next slide, please. Now, another kind of analysis, just kind of getting into the nuts and bolts, we decided to look at the existing fixed route shelters, which you still see elsewhere in Portland. They were, of course, all along division, and looking at the relationships they had with the street, we can understand the implications of that as sort of a precedent study for what we might do. And then if we go to the next slide, we can see that we went through a more thorough analysis of design criteria, which is establishing parameters for what the overall envelope of occupation of these shelters and platforms might be. So we looked at various conditions. We knew that we probably have conditions where we had circulation happening behind the shelter, some through or behind the platform rather, some within the platform, and then we had some indications, some instances where the shelter need to be very, very close to an existing building, and how do we navigate that, and how do we make sure that the shelter is maintainable, and all these other issues. Also thinking about SEPTED issues, understanding, providing both perceived and real safety, visibility, all those kinds of things were part of the exercise. We'll go to the next slide. We did get specifically, of course, into shelter design because, as Jesse mentioned, it needs to be a perceptible brand. It needs to be something that has a sense of character. And so it became an exercise about thinking about how we meet all the criteria, the functional criteria that we've already discussed a little bit, but also how we provide some sort of memorable character and something that's salient. How does the system announce itself to the public, and how do we allow the shelters, which are the most visible components of the system, to function as that thing that unifies the entire alignment? So we went through a pretty, I think, elaborate process of sketching, modeling, talking with TriMet in the lower left. There I was many years ago, and eventually, getting to something in the lower right, which is an earlier version of where we ended up. And going to the extent also, if you notice in this image, we have a building there that we created a rough model of that building to study this, and we did that sort of for a number of buildings along the alignment to get a real sense of what the relationship of these shelters to their context might be. Next slide, please. And we ended up, after all this, we narrowed it down to 5 sort of finalists, and an earlier version of the selected scheme is the one that's at the lower left. And these all had names, and the one in the lower selected is called frames. And so conceptually is an idea about making frames that connected the right of way to what was beyond the right of way and the reverse. So this thing made this system is linear in this direction, but we want to make connections in a perpendicular direction to help erase that the boundary between the right of way and what was adjacent to the right of way. And the next slide, please. We ended up with 4 basic types of general configuration of stations. The first on the left is the pedestrian bypass station, which means that through pedestrian traffic would happen behind the platform. Jesse mentioned that a lot of the stations involve the bus stopping in traffic, and so in lane, which really reduces the amount of dwell time, the amount of stationary time in the vehicle, because it doesn't have to maneuver back into traffic again. So that has a very significant consequences urbanistically, because it is allowing space that was previously either a bus stop or perhaps curbside parking to become habitable pedestrian territory. And it allows the pedestrian path not related to transit to travel unhindered behind the station, and then it allows the bus to stop where it needs to for reduced dwell time, and it allows some opportunities created by having a little bit of extra real estate that's in the pedestrian realm. Where we have wider conditions, like in the pedestrian within the right way, we can use a pedestrian pass-through station. You can push the amenities back towards the back of the sidewalk, and there's enough sidewalk to allow both transit transit riders and other pedestrians to occupy that space between the amenities and the curb. And then the multimodal safety project that Jesse has mentioned involves protected bike path, and how do we get a protected bike path to integrate with the platform. And what you see in the island station on the right is one example of that. That places behind the bike path behind the platform, so it links with the protected bike path on either side of the station seamlessly. And then transit riders cross that path when they make their way to the platform. And there's yet a fourth type that Derek is going to talk to us about.
All right, thanks, Scott. So this is the final design of the fourth type, and what we refer to internally as the bikes behind step out typology. And so you can see there the 60-foot articulated bus at the bottom of the screen. There's basically three primary zones to this station configuration. We've got a step out zone for passenger boarding and alighting activity nearest to the curb there, a bike zone, and then a sidewalk zone plus the shelter. So all of that is at sort of sidewalk level, which at the station was about 9 inches above street level. So you can see on the screen here, bikes would be heading from right to left. They would ramp up to the platform level, sidewalk level, and then back down as they proceeded across the platform itself. And as Scott mentioned, we're connecting to the protected bike lanes that were a part of at least an outer division, the outer division multimodal safety project. So that is the final design, and we'll return to this again, but I wanted to spend the next segment kind of elaborating on our design intent and process. So if you could go to next one. And one more. All right. So, again, this is a station typology that was really born of the specific constraints that we found at station environments along the line. We have some really great standards and best practices for these types of integrated bus bike pedestrian facilities. Scott described the third type as being kind of the island station, which is generally what we would consider to be one of our higher order kind of designs at these locations. But the problem is they only really apply when you've got a generous amount of space to work with, of right of way to work with. And so to give you an idea, we would have needed to meet city standards about 24 feet or so of width. That's from the face of the curb all the way to the back of walk. 24 feet was, it wasn't something that we were able to achieve in a lot of places because of those constraints, because of those narrow kind of right-of-way environments. And so the magic number that we sort of arrived at was 19 feet. And if we could somehow make all of this fit into 19 feet, we knew we had a solution. And so we needed to come up with something else, and it had to be something that was, going to reflect our best design judgment, and collective input of all of our stakeholders and partners. And ultimately, it needed to be something that was going to result in a safe and comfortable and intuitive environment for all of the competing needs and all of the variety of users that we might find at a location like this. You can go to the next slide, Jesse. So we started with a precedent study, kind of defining a variety of different typologies, exploring similar platform and stop configurations throughout North America. We even went to Amsterdam and Copenhagen. We observed activity and user behavior at several similar locations here in the Northwest, in Portland and Seattle. And we convened a series of work sessions. We had design pinups, and we devised a series of spatial exercises that helped us to kind of explore spatially what would fit in some of these zones, what felt comfortable, and how when you move some of these elements around, how they're all related and how they either contribute to or detract from the types of behavior and expectations that we wanted. So you can see in that bottom right-hand corner was one of our work sessions. We actually cleared out a large conference room. We moved down the furniture, the tables and chairs. We laid down some blue painter's tape, and the whole point there was to really try to delineate some of these zones and outline those spatial relationships for a variety of different user groups, and hear from them as to what they thought made sense, what felt good, what felt like it was maybe a little bit too narrow or a little bit too confusing, and what worked well. So you can go to the next slide, Jesse. So this is sort of our iterative design cycle. Jesse had mentioned earlier that, one of our early goals for this project was for it to be something that, wasn't just a one-off solution for this corridor for division. It was really something, it needed to be something that could be replicated throughout the system, across the region. And it needed to be something that we could apply, in our toolkit of solutions at stations. And so we did a lot of testing, did a lot of evaluation. Scott spoke to sort of the rigor of our process earlier. And every time it started with information gathering, we moved into design development, developed concepts. We tested and evaluated those concepts based on a series of criteria that we had kind of cobbled together over time, all the way up to implementation. So you see a photo of the final product there at the top. But it was a lot of back and forth. It was a lot of kind of, step by step, and sometimes moving backwards to go forward. And ultimately, I think what we arrived at is something that really reflects a lot of the regional partnerships and the input of the stakeholders that we consulted with. So something to be proud of there.
And Derek, if I may add, I think one of the things that really benefited us was a recommendation that actually came from our Committee on Accessible Transit. And early on, we were meeting with individual groups, the Bicycle Advisory Committee, the Pedestrian Advisory Committee, the Committee on Accessible Transit. And it was them who said, wait, why are we talking in silos? Let's get into workshops together. And we know it's going to be tough conversations, but we want to understand other priorities. And it was through these workshops that lasted 6 months that really was critical in getting us to a design that we felt comfortable with, because it was a result of those conversations and that cross-pollination that was happening between all of those groups.
All right, next slide. So to that point, this this project, of course, would not have been possible without so many of the partners and stakeholders we were fortunate to engage with throughout the life of the project. Really need to shout out the Committee on Accessible Transit and the Oregon Commission for the Blind, as well as all the city advisory committees who lended their insights, their experience, and were really instrumental in shaping these designs. And to reiterate Jesse's point, one of the most valuable takeaways from this entire process was that sort of in-room collaboration that we were able to produce, having all of these different stakeholders and partners voicing their priorities and their needs, and being able to negotiate to ultimately arrive at a solution that worked for everyone. All right, next slide. So, so I mentioned, kind of the implementation as the last phase, but before we were able to construct all of these stations, we were to do something pretty remarkable. We had our construction contractor build a full-scale mock-up with some modular elements of the station environment of this fourth design. And in doing this, we were able to kind of simulate different scenarios. We were able to test circulation patterns. How were folks accessing the platform? What were those user interactions like? And was it producing the behaviors that we were expecting? So, I've worked on a variety of different quick build and demonstration projects over the years, but this is truly something new, something that I've never seen or done before. So,
and it was nothing,
yeah.
and it was nothing, frankly, that TriMet had ever done before. And so it was pretty remarkable, as you said, Derek. And we also just kind of get a peek behind the curtains. We weren't all in agreement on the treatments after doing lots of workshopping. And so allowing a full-scale mock-up, what it provided us was the ability to do this in-person testing, and we made elements of this modular. So we could change the step out widths. We could shift where the shelter actually sat. We could shift where amenities sat. We even built utility poles so we could understand sight lines and what impacts those have. And it was through this process that I think that really we were able to come collectively to a decision about what really was the right design approach. And Derek, if I may, I'm going to try to share, it's just a quick video of one of our simulated tests that we had done. And over a course of a month, we had lots of people come out, including 2 days where we had everyone from our operations crew within TriMet to all of the advisory committees, technical design experts, all out there at the same time interacting and really basically orchestrated it like a play where you played a part. You were a pedestrian, you were a transit rider, you were a bicyclist. And we were testing, how these should operate, but also asked people at certain points in time to be your baddest selves and act like you think people actually may behave out there, to see what happens when folks don't behave maybe the way we anticipate or want them to. So we'll see if I can get this short video to play here in just a moment. That just gives you a sense of how this worked. Oops, sorry. Apologies here. So you see here that what the expectation is bicyclists stop when the bus board and alights, and you see some of those activities and those interactions. And in terms of what we came away with, I mean, it really was understanding those details of the design, you know, those devils in the detail. We could understand markings and demarcations and signage and how those work. We could better understand behavior and those circulation relationships. And, you know, those key aspects of accessibility and safety that we all fed into ultimately the final design. So we wanted to spend a little bit of time, and we'll quickly turn it over for discussion and Q&A. But as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we just opened this past weekend, and we wanted to share what it's actually looking out there on along division, and share some of our learning and what we were able to do with the project. So first off is you've seen some images previous, but this is ultimately where we landed with the shared bicycle and pedestrian platform that we have 30 of these total between 85th and 175th. And all of those treatments that you see here, the signage, all direct result of all of that extensive workshopping and those simulated tests that we had done. We also, you know, in that block by block work that Scott had mentioned, you know, really that carried over from an ethos that TriMet's established long before the Division Transit project. I know it was put in place when we had done work in the transit mall and other projects, and it was an effort by others to say, hey, let's understand what those needs are of those adjacent businesses, residents, and so that when we're implementing our design, we looked at ways to leverage our improvements to maybe do other things. And so this location at 34th and Division is a prime example. And Scott, do you want to talk a little bit more about this?
Yeah, so this is on the left, we have Loretta Jean's Pie Shop, which, as far as I can tell, is the home of the absolute best pie in the known universe. I recommend that you try it. And so it was one of those businesses that we really hope would benefit from this intervention. So, you know, what we see here is in 34th and Division. On the left, we see the before condition. You see the parked car, and that was typical. There are a line of parked cars there. And then what we see by contrast on the right is the curb has moved about 8 or 10 feet into the street, and so that the bus stops in the street. So you can see that there's been quite a bit of territory that's been converted from vehicular use to pedestrian use. And Loretta Jean's has capitalized on that. You can see that there's a new awning there, the green and white striped awning you see on the right. They've changed the way they operate, partially because of this, partially because of COVID, I imagine, that you go to a Dutch door, and so you don't go in the building, actually go to the Dutch door with your pie, and there's a window adjacent to that where you pick up your pie. And there's space to enjoy your pie. Also, there have been some other collateral benefits. When you look at the left, you can see that there is a raised curb between the sidewalk and those two businesses. And there's another step from that raised curb to the floor level. You can see that it's typically, or there was obviously a hazard because it's painted with yellow, bright yellow indication of where that raised up. And because lots of grading needed to be done, our civil engineers were really great in collaborating with us and finding other benefits to that regrading. One of those, we could eliminate that first level, which made for more accessible area on the sidewalk and eliminated, you know, a trip hazard. So if we go to the next slide, you kind of see that's part of our design team with the far picnic table. And so you can see that it really comes together and feels like a completely cohesive, connected place, connected to the rest of alignment, connected transit, connected to business. And, you know, that bus, when it pulls in, that actually feels good. You know, it's another wall of that outdoor room that's there temporarily. And it's really sort of a fun exchange. So I think this is an example of the symbiosis we're seeking, and I think in several instances we achieved that pretty well, pretty effectively. And so, in this quickly is just kind of a sense of more process. This is across the intersection at 34th westbound in front of Ava Jeans, not to be confused with Loretta Jeans. And so it shows the process of the existing condition on the upper left and some imagining in the upper right of how we might modify that. Again, the curve is moving out, as you can see, but you can see that seating there in front of Ava Jeans and how important that was to the business. So it was incredibly critical that we think very, very carefully about all these elements and how this addition to this part of the city, this block, could actually reinforce the positive activity that was happening there previously. So down below, and I'm sorry, if you back up just for a second, the two images in the below are examples of the kind of modeling we did to study the relationship of all these components and really understand how we can shuffle, mix things around. You'll see that the amenities are in different positions than they were relative to each other on the opposite intersection. Everything we can do to really try to make this work. Next slide. And so here we see the before and after. And again, we preserved what was really working before for these businesses, and I think we've made it a better environment for everyone. The curve is pushed out, there's more space there, and the transit amenities are actually useful for both the people, the patrons of the restaurants, pedestrians, and transit riders.
We also just wanted to give a sense of the built condition across the corridor now. So 34th and Division, which we've spent some time, Scott's discussed a little bit here. 135th and Division, you see just how these station elements live in different conditions. I think one of the things that we also were recognizing is that these places change over time. And so having that dialogue with the adjacencies and being able to have those adapt over time and with development, if something should change, these are kit parts, a modular system. It can change, it can expand, it becomes smaller depending on ridership needs, but also responds to the context around them. And then, we had mentioned that a big component of this project was safety. And so both our project and the Outer Division multimodal project did a lot of safety improvements, including signalized pedestrian crossings, which you see on the right here. Also wanted to just quickly mention that, this project was fundamentally about bringing a much needed transit improvement, but we recognize the fact that it would be foolish to make these improvements in a vacuum, and we should understand opportunities. And even if our transit project couldn't provide or couldn't do the investment, we wanted to at least understand the potential so that we could at least set the stage for future interventions. And 82nd Division, the gateway to the Jade District, is a big opportunity. And so though we recognize we couldn't do all of those improvements that we'd like to see to have it be a gateway, and we saw plaza opportunities, we took a little time to do some placemaking exercises across the corridor with the thought and the understanding that we're not implementing them, but let's understand them, let's engage the community so that when we are making these transit improvements, we're setting that stage and we're understanding that potential and hopefully getting that process started. And so the image on the right is some of those things we were able to do, including putting some planting areas in, putting in a seat wall, some of these other things that aren't directly related to transit, but really do make a difference. We also, recognizing that we no longer have 2% that can be dedicated to public art projects with these, that changed back in the Trump administration. We looked for opportunities to integrate artistic elements, and the windscreens for our shelters became an opportunity. So at distinct locations where the community said, hey, these are important places, we worked with Mayor Reed to come up with some really thoughtful and beautiful windscreen designs that kind of speak to place in those communities. And then just lastly, I mentioned that, not everywhere as Scott said, every location was unique, and not everywhere we could fit shelter and all the amenities. So we wanted to recognize, what those opportunities are. And this particular building on 20th and Division wasn't built at the time of our design and planning, but through that process of our design development, we recognized what that building would look like. And we're really able to create a marriage between our transit elements and the building adjacent. And the Community Vision is a great organization that works with the disability community to showcase their work. And so we're able to still have these really important windows to showcase that work. So with that, I'll turn it over for Q&A and any discussion, but also just a plug to come out and ride FX on Division Line.
Awesome. Thank you, Jesse. Yeah, this is a great story about just really how streetscapes come down to every inch of right of way. They all have a value, and it's really trying to assign them to the right place. So we do have some questions coming in, and I'm gonna moderate for our group if that works. So Joel has the first question. He wants to know how many hours were spent workshopping on site at the full-scale timber mock-up. If you could kind of characterize the effort in terms of level of work.
Yeah, well, we were able to get a park and ride for a month, and I think we used just about every day of that month to some degree, both in terms of constructing the full-scale mock-up, but then we had planned some larger simulated test events where we invited a big group out, and we ended up borrowing an articulated bus like this from our sister transit agency up at C-Tran, and had those operators. They were awesome partners, came out with their operators to run bus service on our mock-up. And then we did some very targeted tests. So we had worked with the Oregon Design Commission to understand treatments. And so if you look at this image here, you'll see a white directional tile band that runs perpendicular to the street. This is a direct result of working with those communities to understand how they can best navigate these systems. And so having a consistent element that leads one to a front door and to a tactile element that tells someone where they're at were a direct result of those mock-ups. And so there was a lot of targeted work through the course of that month with particular groups to understand their considerations and needs.
Perfect. Next we have Amy. He wants to know, were there other options considered for managing the bike bus rider interactions? I see the likelihood for conflict between bikes and people boarding or exiting the bus.
Yeah, I welcome Derek's thoughts on this too. We considered a lot of options. Given the limited right-of-way, we really were left with limited options. One of the other viable options was having the buses cross over the bike lane, so the bike lane to remain in street. But at the end of the day, the car and bicycle conflict those are serious conflicts that result in fatalities. And I think when we weighed safety and we looked at the different conflicts of all those modes, putting bikes and pedestrians and transit riders, mixing those in a station, if we did it thoughtfully and did our job in really understanding those interactions, we felt like was a better, safer option. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Derek.
Yeah, no, I would agree with all of that, Jesse. And this was again, born out of an initial phase of work that really looked to kind of define what typologies might be possible, what were their space requirements, what were the different kind of composition of elements, these different facilities, these different zones, really with the goal of first resolving any potential safety issues, and then next, of course, ensuring that all of the users in this environment would feel a high level of high degree of comfort, right? So is conflict eliminated with this design? I probably wouldn't go so far as to say it was eliminated, but it's definitely been minimized, and we've also, I think, instituted a number of some of our recommendations around the kind of operational controls that are a part of this design. And that includes everything from the pavement markings and, look legends, the directional indicators, and the requirement that bikes are, to stop when a bus pulls up and passengers are boarding and alighting. So, there's a number of hard operational controls that that are a part of this, in addition to the physical design elements. And then I'll also say that a lot of this is designing for a very particular type of activity, but we're also trying to create a little bit of a buffer for ourselves, a little bit of of wiggle room in case folks are going to operate as outside of those lines. And so the fact that everything's at the same level, that if someone needs to veer, say on a bike, outside of that green striped lane, they can do that when it's clear. There is enough space there at the curb in that step out zone for a person that's stepping off the bus to realize that within a few steps that there's a bike coming if that bike did not stop, and enough of reaction time to stop. So things like that are all kind of baked into this design. And yeah, I'd welcome any other questions, specific questions that you might have about how we arrived at specific dimensions and what the trade-offs were.
Awesome, thank you, Dick. I'm going to kind of lump together a couple of questions here. Erin says she loves the mock-up. Are there lessons learned from undertaking a mock-up process that maybe you could share, just in terms of timing, budgeting, etc.? And I think kind of related to that, are there plans to develop other similar transit corridors to this in the metro area? Where can we start taking those lessons learned, and what are we looking to put them on?
So I'll answer the last question first, which is, yes, we're absolutely looking at integrating more BRT in the Portland region, and planning efforts for 82nd and TV Highway are underway now, and we're definitely carrying those lessons that we've learned from Division over to those projects. The mock-up process is, there is a cost, right? There's a cost associated with constructing. There's a time sink that people have to dedicate to. But I think my own takeaway from it is, especially when we're introducing an entirely new tool to the region, being able to have that confidence in a design driven from a really rigorous process like that really made all the difference. And I think in the scheme of things, it reduced probably the amount of engagement we had to do, and other type of design work we may have to do if we didn't go through like a traditional design development process. So I don't think it makes sense for everything, certainly, right? But when you're introducing something like this, that's a new tool that has potential implications across not just Division, but the region, as we look at future projects like this, it's really important to do a project like this, and can't recommend highly enough, when under those right circumstances, to take an approach like this. And it's also something that we look to share beyond just TriMet, with our colleagues at other transit agencies and other cities. Tools like this are being developed, and we're learning from them. And so our hope is, we want to continue share, but we also want to learn from other cities. What are they finding? What are they seeing? And as a part of our understanding of these new multimodal station types, we're also working with PSU to do some ongoing monitoring of these stations to understand behaviors and how they're performing over time, so that we can tweak these if we're seeing something that's just not working quite right or as we anticipated.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to jump to a personal question. So I'm aware that these are all new articulated buses. And so I guess I'm curious, was there conversation about kind of how to translate the platform elements into the design of the new buses in terms of relationship of where bikers are going to go and how the wheelchairs enter, and kind of what was that conversation around bus design?
Yeah, that's a great question, Fiona. It's a little bit challenging because, you put out an RFP for buses, you don't know what manufacturer you're necessarily going to have when you're in design. And so each, those manufacturers that make these buses, they're a little bit different. Even the door placement can be different between manufacturers of the buses. But I think there was enough there that we knew there was going to be 3 doors. We knew that the middle door was going to be wider. We knew that we wanted bikes on the bus as opposed to on front of the bus. So we were able to have that understanding inform our station design and vice versa. And we did have some flexibility on how we could arrange seating in the bus. But I would say, the most, working with that Committee on Accessible Transit, being able to simultaneously look at the bus layout and the station design was incredibly helpful. So we weren't looking at these things individually, we were really understanding their interface. And so we were able to go up again to Vancouver with that committee, and we were able to see how those buses interact with those platforms. And that really, I think, gave us the most in terms of being able to inform not only our station design, but the layouts of our buses.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to jump to Hannah's question. Is the cost of ridership and the user experience, parentheses, hot pass, the same as riding the MAX, regular bus, etc.? Is the cost of ridership the same?
The cost of ridership. I'm not entirely sure. I can get back on that question, though. I'm not sure.
And David's got a question. Really appreciates the transparency of materials. Do the ped and bike stops take more than the parking zone spatially? Do they expand into the street beyond that, 8 or 9 feet of parking where we have bulb outs?
Derek, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think I could speak to that. And this is this pertains, I guess, to the fourth typology, the shared bus bike pedestrian platforms, most directly, but I think it applies broadly to all of the typologies. And the answer would be generally, well, for this particular project, the answer is mostly yes. There were a few places where we, as Fiona said, inches matter, where we had to take a little bit more to ensure that we had minimum dimensions here or there. But that is typically what we aim for to begin with, is if we can create a curb extension or a bulb out that is within that shadow of what was parking, it's almost like a 1-for-1 trade, especially since this is a line that's designed for in-lane stops, so the bus is not pulling out into its own bus pullout. We can bring it right up to that travel lane and really maximize the pedestrian kind of space and for all of that activity that we've talked about. So mostly yes is the answer.
And I think before we wrap up, I just want to note Beverly has a fun idea, which is that kind of similar to school buses. You could have a little lighted stop sign, perhaps on future buses, that alerts approaching bikes that the bus is about to deboard.
Oh, and we do, I didn't mention, there is a stop light on the back of the bus with that thought that it helps inform those bicyclists to stop when they're at the shared bike peds.
Awesome. Well, we have lots more questions, but I know that we are at 1 o'clock. And so hopefully folks can get their questions answered kind of offline. But I want to thank Jesse and Derek and Scott so much for coming today and really appreciate you sharing this great project. And yeah, we'll just remind everyone, please go test it out in the field in person. And thank you so much for sharing this work with us. We will convene again next month, so stay tuned on our topic and we'll have that posted to our website shortly. Thank you, Jesse, Scott, and Derek.
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. That was a really great presentation. Thanks, Fiona.
Have a great day, everyone.